Final Destination, Bloodlines 2025, marks the highly anticipated sixth chapter of the iconic horror franchise, a return that fans have been waiting for over a decade. Directed by Zach Lipovsky and Adam B. Stein, with a story by John Watts, the creative force behind the MCU's Spider-Man trilogy, and a screenplay by Guy Busick and Laurie Evans-Taylor, this entry sets out to do something bold: expand the mythology of Death's design while grounding it in a deeply personal, generational curse. It's not just about escaping fate anymore. It's about bloodlines, legacies, and the terrifying truth that some destinies are inherited. From its opening frames, the film wastes no time in pulling us into its unsettling premise. We meet Stefani Reyes, played by Caitlin Sanahuana, a college student who's been plagued by vivid, recurring nightmares for weeks. But these aren't random flashes of fear. They are disturbingly specific visions of a catastrophic disaster. In her dreams, she finds herself inside the Sky View, a sleek, high-rise restaurant tower in 1969, where a sudden and violent structural collapse kills dozens of people. And among the dead in these visions are her maternal grandparents, Iris and Paul Campbell. The Sky View sequences are filmed with a warm, nostalgic glow. Champagne toasts, waiters gliding between tables, a band playing a gentle waltz under the soft glimmer of chandeliers. But just as the audience settles into the elegance, death begins its silent countdown. A faint tremor shakes a wine glass, cracks spider across the ceiling. The silverware on pristine white tablecloths vibrates in place, almost imperceptibly at first. Then glass explodes from the towering windows, screams cut through the music, and the entire structure groans under the weight of its impending collapse. It's a breathtaking shift from beauty to chaos, as if death itself allowed everyone to feel safe for one last moment before tearing it all apart. In the present day, Stefani decides to visit her grandmother, Iris, now played by Gabrielle Rose, who lives deep in the woods, inside a fortified, almost bunker-like cabin. The drive up there is unsettling in itself, the road twisting through dense forest, where sunlight barely pierces the heavy canopy above. The deeper she goes, the quieter it becomes, until even the hum of her car feels too loud. When Stefani arrives, she finds Iris frail but sharp-eyed, her voice carrying the weight of decades of fear. She wastes no time. Death is coming for them all. Iris reveals that back in 1969, she had her premonition while dining at the Sky View. She saw the collapse before it happened and managed to warn the guests, leading to a frantic evacuation that spared dozens of lives, including her own and Paul's. But what she thought was a miracle of survival turned out to be something else entirely. Death, Iris explains, works like a meticulous accountant. It has a ledger, and when the natural order is disrupted, it adjusts, reclaiming the lives it was meant to take in the exact order they were supposed to die. And when those original survivors are gone, death moves on to their descendants. Surviving once doesn't erase the debt. It passes the balance forward to the next generation. For years, Iris documented the pattern in careful, almost obsessive detail. She's watched friends and family die in ways that look like freak accidents to outsiders, but to her, they were executions carried out with surgical precision. She's fortified her home, sealed windows, replaced every loose hinge, and avoided dangerous situations at all costs. But now cancer is draining her strength, and Stefani's nightmares are proof that the curse has shifted. Stefani doesn't believe her. Not yet. She forces a smile, trying to pass it off as the ramblings of an old woman haunted by trauma. But that skepticism lasts only minutes. Outside the cabin, the wind begins to pick up, rattling the trees. A weather vane perched on the roof squeaks as it turns, the rusty screws holding it in place vibrating against their mounts. In a sequence staged with excruciating tension, we see it swaying above, the camera cutting between the trembling metal, the creak of the wooden frame, and Iris stepping into its shadow. A final, violent gust rips it free. Time seems to slow as it spins through the air, glinting in the weak sunlight before it impales Iris with brutal force. It's a death so sudden and deliberate that Stephanie's breath catches. And in that instant, she knows her grandmother's warning was real. Panicked and trembling, Stefani fumbles for her phone, her hands slick with rain and shock as she calls her brother Charlie, played by Teo Briones. Her voice cracks as she warns him they're in danger. Not someday, not in some abstract way, but right now. Charlie, skeptical but protective, agrees to meet her. Soon they're joined by their Aunt Darlene, Raya Kielstedt, and cousin Eric, Richard Harmon. Together, they try to map the bloodline, piecing the family tree like it's a hit list written by death itself. Old photographs are spread across the table, birth certificates and news clippings scattered under dim lamplight. The task feels impossible. There are too many branches, too many names, and no clear way to know who's next. But the deeper they dig, the clearer it becomes. Death doesn't just sit back and wait, it sets the stage. A frayed electrical cord, a wobbly shelf, a loose screw. Each becomes a loaded gun waiting for the right moment to go off. Every space they enter hums with the quiet potential for disaster. Every sound, a drip, a creak, a faint hum, could be the start of the chain. Eric is the first to fall after Iris. Working late at a small-town auto repair shop, he's surrounded by hazards. A creaking hydraulic lift groaning under the weight of a sedan. An air compressor hissing as pressure leaks through a faulty valve, and a half-empty bottle of engine oil swaying dangerously on the edge of a shelf. For nearly 2 minutes, the sequence toys with the audience, each detail presented as the likely trigger. But the fatal blow comes from the least expected. Eric slips on the oil, crashes into the lift's control lever, and the car drops just enough to pin him. He struggles, gasping, until an overhead light fixture finally snaps free, slamming into him with deadly finality. It's morbidly clever, pure Final Destination craftsmanship. Charlie is horrified. The look in his eyes says it all. He believes now. They rush to find Darlene, knowing she's next in line. Her death is perhaps the most visually arresting in the film. As the curator of a small but prestigious art museum, Darlene moves through halls lined with glass cases, towering sculptures, and intricate hanging installations. The place is a playground for death. A spilled drink from a distracted child seeps across the floor toward an exposed electrical panel. Above, a thick cable frays strand by strand. Guests wander obliviously, snapping photos as small sparks flutter near a velvet rope. And then, the chain reaction ignites. A lighting rig drops with a metallic scream, shattering glass displays, sending priceless artifacts tumbling. Darlene turns, her reflection catching in a broken shard, just as a jagged piece of tempered glass slices across her throat. The scene holds on her frozen, wide-eyed shock for a split second before cutting to black. For fans, these sequences are littered with hidden nods. In the museum, a sculpture eerily resembles the infamous log truck from Final Destination 2. In Eric's garage, a calendar hangs on the wall, showing the same month and year as the roller coaster disaster in Final Destination 3. They're blink-and-you-miss-it details, but they reward sharp-eyed viewers. That night, while going through Iris's old journals, Stefani and Charlie discover scattered references to something called the Keeper. The handwriting is jagged, almost desperate, alongside sketches of accident scenes and lists of names crossed out in red. This leads them to the film's most anticipated cameo, Tony Todd's return as William Bloodworth. His entrance is a deliberate echo of his first appearance in the 2000 original. Low-lit room, that slow, deliberate voice, and the glint of knowing in his eyes. But now he's older, slower, and his presence feels heavier, more final. Bludworth tells them the truth they feared. Death's design isn't random. The bloodline's rule is ancient, a balance that has existed longer than any human memory. Breaking it, he hints, would require severing the line at its root. When Charlie asks what that means, Bludworth leans in and says, "You can run from the debt, but the debt will always find you." From here, the film shifts into high gear. Death's presence feels almost physical, like a pressure pushing down on every scene. Charlie narrowly avoids one elaborate setup in the family kitchen. A dropped knife that sticks upright in the floor, a pot of boiling water that sloshes dangerously toward a frayed electrical outlet, and a collapsing shelf overhead. For a moment, it looks like he's safe. But Final Destination never lets you breathe for long. Stefani, desperate to change the rules, decides to put herself directly in the line of fire, hoping to disrupt the sequence. It's a callback to Final Destination 5's intervention theory, but here it feels more reckless, more personal. One of the film's most suspenseful sequences follows. Stefani drives alone on a rain-slick road, windshield wipers struggling to keep up, headlights strobing against the downpour. A deer bolts into her path, forcing her to swerve into a half-finished construction zone. Steel beams dangle from cranes, scaffolding sways in the wind, and the sound design slows to a tense heartbeat. Just when the audience braces for impact, a truck roars past, missing her by inches. A perfect fake-out that leaves you shaken because you know the real danger hasn't passed. The climax takes place in the rebuilt Skyview Tower, a place where the curse began and, Stefani believes, where it can end. She convinces Charlie to meet her there, hoping to confront the root Bludworth hinted at. The modernized restaurant is all glass, chrome, and reflective surfaces, each hiding potential death traps. Waiters carry champagne flutes balanced on narrow trays, ceiling fixtures sway gently above, and a decorative water feature sends ripples across a slick marble floor. Charlie steps out to the balcony to take a call. Inside, a busboy trips, sending a tray of glasses crashing to the floor. The sound startles a guest, who bumps into a tall heat lamp. It tips, catching a curtain on fire. In the chaos, a security barrier gives way, and a loose overhead panel comes crashing down, right onto Charlie. The crowd's panic swallows Stefani's scream. In that instant, she realizes the truth. She is the last link in Death's ledger. Severing the line at its root means her. If she dies, the bloodline ends, and the design is satisfied. But survival instinct runs deep, and she bolts into the tower's service quarters. The final chase is the most elaborate Rube Goldberg setup of the film. Stefani slips on a wet floor, grabbing a hanging cable for balance. That cable pulls on a ceiling-mounted lift, which strains under the weight of a decorative steel beam. Above, a ventilation fan wobbles loose, screws rattling. The soundtrack drops into near silence, letting her rapid breathing fill the space. She looks up just in time to see the beam shift, and then the screen cuts to black before impact. The epilogue is pure Final Destination poetry. A slow tracking shot moves across a family tree, each name crossed out in red, ending with Stefani's. The camera lingers until a faint, ghostly new branch appears, labeled only with a question mark. Somewhere the bloodline lives on. The final voice we hear belongs to Tony Todd's Bludworth. No matter how far you run, the line will always lead back to you. His voice fades, replaced by the stark white Final Destination title card. If you've made it this far into the breakdown, you're one of us. A true horror fan who lives for the tension, the craft, and the delicious inevitability of these movies. Smash that like button, subscribe so you never miss the next deep dive, and tell me in the comments, do you think Death's design can ever be broken? Or are we all just living on borrowed time?